Tatiana is one of the most diverse dining rooms in New York City. And you'll see somebody in a do-rag sitting next to somebody in a tuxedo going to the opera, and they're both eating oxtails. And, that cultural equilibrium is what makes me really, really proud of what we do at Tatiana.
In 2008, an 18-year-old college student from the Bronx, New York, had an idea. The Nigerian-American son of a chef, Kwame Onwuachi watched his mom struggle to grow her own catering business, only to fall into the easy money allure of the streets. Inspired by the election of Barack Obama, Onwuachi followed in his mother's footsteps, pursuing a culinary vision based on his own life story. After cooking at some of the most prestigious establishments in the world, Onwuachi founded a series of his own restaurants, culminating in the New York Times Best Restaurant in New York for 2 years in a row, Tatiana at Lincoln Center. And it all started with one idea. Being a chef is a discipline, particularly at the level that you are operating, that requires a number of different qualities and attributes. What would you say are the most important of those qualities for someone to have?
I would say, as unfortunate as it is, sacrifice is a big one. Sacrificing to the craft. You have to put in a lot of hours, a lot of time in and out of the kitchens. I tell my cooks that all the time. The most important work you do is outside of the kitchen. So when you come in, you're set up for success. So you're gonna have to sacrifice a lot of hanging out with people, or you're gonna miss out on big events for this craft if you really, really want to pursue it. And then attention to detail. All of the small things matter, because they add up to the bigger things. If you can't fold your towel right on your station, how can I trust you with searing a piece of protein, So I would say those are like two big things for me.
How did your parents' professional lives inform your ambition?
I would say my mom definitely, first and foremost, she was a chef. So I grew up in the kitchen. She operated a catering company out of this small one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, and we all had to help out to keep the lights on. My sister, 6 years older than me, so she could go to the events with my mom, but I was left at home with all of the different ingredients, and that's how it really sparked my interest in food and creativity, and just how someone can provide for themselves, and be their own boss. I didn't really understand all the financials at that age, but I knew that she was her own boss, and that was really, really appealing to me, even at a young age.
What about your father?
So my father is a contractor and architect.
Okay.
So I got a lot of attention to detail from him, whether it's being on the job sites with him or seeing, the plans out in his office and how he even notated them. Everything was very, very organized and rigid. But I think that directly translated to my craft and just the way that I carry myself as well.
You grew up in the Bronx.
Shout out to the BX, baby.
Yes. Each borough is very distinct, and within each borough, each neighborhood is also very distinct. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how did your experience in the Bronx, in the neighborhood that you grew up in, sort of inform a unique experience for you?
I grew up moving around a lot in the Bronx. I probably moved 8 times during my childhood. So I had to learn and adapt to these different neighborhoods every couple of years. And the dope thing about the Bronx is that, and New York City in general, but the Bronx is so multicultural. So on one block, you can have 10 different restaurants, from 10 different nationalities. So that it taught me a lot that in regards to my profession, but also in dealing with different people and new people.
My ideas come from so many different places. It can be inspired by travel, it can be a dream, it could be eating a dish at a restaurant, it could be watching a movie. Ideas are all around us. So I think it's best to just be a sponge and accept all.
At 10, your mother sent you to Nigeria. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, that wasn't really what you thought was happening, but you ended there for 2 years.
Well, I was definitely veering off on the wrong path, which is pretty easy to do in the Bronx, growing up.
What does that mean at 10?
Just being disobedient, staying out really, really late, coming in when I wanted to, hanging out with the wrong crowd, things like that. And my mom, she didn't want to see that go any further. So she said I was going on a 2-week vacation to Nigeria. I was ecstatic.
Sounds like a fun time.
It sounded like a dope time. Didn't think I deserved it, but hey. And then when I got there, I quickly realized it was not a vacation at all. And, I spoke to her and she said, you're gonna stay here until you learn respect and learn to appreciate what you have here in America. So I went from playing PlayStation to doing my homework with a kerosene lamp. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water. We had to raise our own livestock. However, when I got back, I think I was worse than when I left because I was fearless. I had lived through something that most Americans don't live through. So the fears that I had before, they were gone when I came back to America. It wasn't until I reached my adulthood that I really started to think about the lessons that I learned there and how fortunate and privileged we all are out here, and to not take that for granted.
While you were in Nigeria, you lived with your grandfather, mm-hmm. who is an academic.
Mm-hmm.
How did his profession and sort of worldview inform how you think about things?
His ideology and just his way of life affected me. I couldn't really dissect the dichotomy of him being an academic at that age, but just his demeanor, the way he carried himself, the topics he talked about, the lessons that he tried to instill in us at a young age are things that I've taken with me. He was an avid proponent for civil rights for Black people in America. And that has always stuck with me, and I think that's why I do what I do, and everything that I do, I try to uplift my people's culture with it as well, with whatever platform that I have, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, whether it's a restaurant. I want to continue to push that narrative that, we belong and we should be respected.
I don't think there are bad ideas. As someone who has done a lot of stupid shit in his life, they're all lessons. So I think, you have an idea, it's just great to see it through because you never know what's going to come from it. Even if it's quote unquote a bad idea, something dope can come out of that too.
You mentioned coming back and being even more of a hellraiser than you were after leaving. In your teen years, you get into selling drugs, you get into gang activity, get into even possessing firearms.
Mm-hmm.
What was the point of inflection that was the catalyst for change?
It was very serendipitous, I guess. I had some friends over, we were partying, and on the screen was Barack Obama, becoming the president of the United States. And I voted for him, but I was like, I don't know if a Black man is ever gonna be the president of the United States of America. And seeing him walk across that stage, I was just like, holy shit, I can do whatever I put my mind to. Seeing that really changed the way that I even viewed myself. And, that day I flushed everything that I had down the toilet and bought a one-way plane ticket to Louisiana and was like, I'm gonna figure my life out. I didn't know I wanted to be a chef. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. But I didn't see a fairy tale ending for anybody in my neighborhood. that was dealing drugs or lived that lifestyle.
You end up moving to Louisiana and begin your path towards the profession
Culinary arts.
of the culinary arts. Yes, exactly. What was that progression like? And then two, what was specifically the experience that you had on that ship that brought it all into focus?
For me, I feel like this life is a progression, you know, like it started when I was in my mom's kitchen. Like it never really hit me that I wanted to like be a chef until later on. So, you know, so I started out as a dishwasher when I moved to Louisiana. Then I was a server in a restaurant. Then I was a cook. And then I was a cater waiter. And then I was a catering chef. And, you know, then I got the role on the boat during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to cook for the oil spill workers. And that experience was, I don't know, it was wild, honestly. It was the first time I was on my own as a young chef, cook, cooking whatever recipes I could think of, you know, for a group of people. And we had to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for this crew.
At what point did you start to feel like, I'm kind of nice at this?
When people would line up when they knew that I was cooking. Yeah, I was like, all right, this may be something that I should think about. And people would tell me, like, you should do this. You know, like you're consistently cooking good meals for us that are better than what they've had. I think that's telling. I think that's why a lot of chefs get into cooking in general. You know, you can really see when someone is enjoying a dish kind of instantly. And that's kind of like a high, like someone enjoying your creation. And you get that instant feedback from somebody. And at the same time, you're also nourishing people. It's like the only art form that you actually ingest that really sustains life. So that was a really dope experience.
With an initial taste of the power of his cooking to move people, Onwuachi set out to make his inherited passion a career. His pursuit would lead him from the subways of New York to the hallowed kitchens of the world's most famous restaurants. But a spectacular failure at his first solo venture would put his ultimate aspirations in doubt. So then you come back to New York City and you set your mind to starting your own catering company, correct? Mm-hmm. And you managed to fund this in a very unusual way. What was the sort of light bulb moment that led you to deciding to sell candy on the subways?
Well, I wanted to start a catering company and I needed capital. I would, you know, thrift clothes. I bought, I think, 1,000 glow sticks and tried to sell glow sticks in Times Square. Don't do that also. Nobody wants to buy glow sticks, but I thought I could get them off. And then I was on the train coming home from work and there was a kid there and he was selling candy. So my mind was already like, okay, let me figure out how to like move and shake. I was rapping at the time also, so I would do like events at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe and serve food in between, you know, and that's how I'd pay my rent. So I saw the kid selling candy on the subway and I kind of laughed, and then I was like, holy shit, this kid just made like $5 in 2 minutes. I was like, what does an hour of that look like? I was like, what does an 8-hour shift of that look like? And I realized that this kid was making way more money than I was tax-free. So I went into work the next day. I thanked them so much for the opportunity. I was working at Kraft for Tom Colicchio at the time. And I quit and I hit the subway.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Let's get back to this rap thing for a second. I need to hear more about this. So when you say you were a rapper, like...
I was an aspiring rapper, yeah. Yeah.
Are there songs that exist?
Yes, there are.
Okay. And what made you abandon this?
Well, I was rapping, pursuing an acting career, and cooking all at the same time.
Wow. Okay.
And then the cooking just took off, so I didn't have time really to keep up with the other two.
Crazy.
So I just poured everything into the cooking. Yeah, there's enough industries to go around.
So you had to earn $20,000. It's not a small amount of candy to sell on the subway. How long did that take you? And how quickly were you able to transition from that into, you know, launching your catering business?
I think it was like 3-4 months. And then, yeah, I mean, at the same time, I was building everything. So I would get some money and I would build a website. I would get some money and I would formulate an LLC. And I would get some money and get a commercial cooking space. And there was a time where I was still catering a little bit and doing that at the same time until I could really dive into just doing the catering full time.
Did you have any mentorship, or like where were you finding out about like starting an LLC and, you know, all these kinds of things?
I didn't. I just had to figure it out on my own, honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Crazy. You talk about a pretty funny interaction that you had with Steve Stout, where you run up on him, give him a card, tell him you'd like to cater one of his parties.
Yeah.
And then, incensed that he has not called you a month later, find him at another book signing and confront him about his lack of hitting you up.
Yeah.
I'm curious, now that you are yourself quite successful, rich, and famous, what is your perspective on that approach?
Oh, it's a terrible approach. I've talked to him about it. Like, now that, you know, we have a relationship, but I'm not mad at it. I still think it shows tenacity. I think I would have reacted the same way as him, but I think you gotta want it. You know, I wanted it by any means, and I wasn't gonna let anybody tell me no. But if you were gonna tell me no, it had to be a strong no, which he did. And I think that's what you need, you know, to achieve, you know, true success in whatever industry you're in.
Definitely have some self-inhibiting doubts, but I pushed through. I think that's what real courage is. It's being afraid, but still pushing through and getting the job done.
The catering business gets off the ground and you start scaling and having to hire employees and put together a team and all of that. How did you think about finding people? What were the qualities and skills that you were looking for? And also, how has your thinking about that evolved?
I don't want to say it hasn't changed, but for the catering company, it was all my friends from high school or my new friends in culinary school. We banded together and just got the job done. You know, I don't think any of us had any idea what we were doing. I know I didn't, and I had to lead this group of misfits, but you know, we were able to achieve some really dope things. And now I think it's kind of similar. You know, like, I like to surround myself with people that I trust. I don't care so much about a resume as much as like your ability to like get a task done. So it hasn't changed that much.
What is the key to sort of maintaining that sense of brand across a constantly churning staff and then keeping those key employees?
You have to try to treat people well. That's at the core of everything, is to try to just treat people well and have empathy. In terms of like remaining consistent, that's the biggest battle in the restaurant industry. I mean, the person that's been able to do that the best is fucking Ronald McDonald, you know? But every restaurant is trying to figure out how to be consistent every day, because we're working with human beings that have feelings. You know, they have a life outside of this, and you bring that into work, you bring that into your work. So it's a challenge. I think logistically, we try to have checks and balances. You know, we try to have recipes measured down to the gram. So there isn't much of a variable that can happen. And if it is, it's so minute that the guest doesn't really notice it. But it's a challenge.
You're doing the catering business. You realize that you need to go to cooking school. Mm-hmm. What was the sort of impetus that made you think?
There were moments within the catering world, like me, like messing up at events and, you know, not really delivering what I should have been. And I had to have a real conversation with myself in the mirror. And I knew that I needed to get some better education, whether that was going to work in a restaurant, taking a step back so I could take a giant leap forward.
In this age of everything being available on YouTube, I'm curious, do you think still that culinary school is a must for someone aspiring to step into the spaces that you're in?
I don't think it ever has been a must. I don't think anything is a must. Everybody learns differently. But you cannot just learn from YouTube, I will say that. You need to actually cook for people. You need to, you know, learn the proper ways to do something repetitively. Like, constantly until there's no way for you to like get it wrong because you've done it so many times right.
What were the most crucial things that you took away from your experience at CIA?
Oh man, I loved it. I loved it so much. It was like being at Hogwarts or something, you know what I mean? Like everybody was there for the same reason. I learned a lot of professionalism there. I learned, there were definitely technical aspects of cooking, you know, different techniques that I've taken from there. But just the community, you know, like that community was just so incredible. Like it was, at that time, it was the future of the culinary industry.
If someone was interested in becoming a chef, the first step I would advise them to take is to not do it. It's really, really difficult. I would say, are you sure you want to fucking do this? But other than that, if they said, I really want to do this, I would tell them they need to like find the best restaurant in their town, wherever it is, and work there at least for a year or two to see if they really want to do it, and to hone in on their craft, the foundation and the fundamentals.
Then you end up getting the externship, is that the right phrase? Okay.
Yeah.
At Per Se. In the past, was a top 2 or 3 restaurant in the world. What was sort of the most consequential part of that experience?
That experience, I mean, I learned so many technical skills on how to cook, but also how to carry myself in the kitchen, and professionalism, sense of urgency, attention to detail, which I talked about before. That folding the towel thing even comes from Per Se. So I learned so much about fine dining, but also like how to take those things and apply it to, you know, whatever it is that I want to do, whether it's fine dining or not. Just really caring about every single thing that you're doing, because it does affect the guest experience.
When you end up at 11 Madison Park, is that as a job or is that a continued externship?
It was a job.
Okay.
Yeah, I was still at the CIA, and I would come down, I would take the train down and work there, and then take the train back up so I can make it for class.
What were the biggest differences? There are obviously 2 world-class kitchens, but with 2 very different personalities running them.
Yeah, I mean, they're 2 different restaurants. Restaurants, they're different because they're an expression of a human being, you know? So like, it's going to be inherently different. You know, the finishes are going to be different. The key seasonings are going to be different. The culture is going to be different.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like the culture of how everyone relates to one another. Is it very unique spot to spot?
Yeah, it's extremely unique from place to place. You know, the most unique thing was I found a mentor at 11 Madison Park, Jamal James Kent. He was the chef de cuisine there, and you know, he kind of took me under his wing. So that was like the biggest difference for me, is having someone that was like a really, really great leader, and he didn't lead like other fine dining chefs that I have worked with. You know, it wasn't through fear, it was through like understanding. And it was through empathy and communication. So that was a really pivotal moment in my career.
Generally, you pivot when things aren't working out. And I think for me, I pivot when my happiness is not meeting like my expectations. But if I'm happy and I'm still like in something that's like unfavorable, I'm gonna push through. But if I'm unhappy and shit is not working out, then it's time to go.
From 11 Madison Park, you end up helping a friend with a pop-up, which then leads to you having a series of pop-ups yourself. What was that experience like, of taking the same experience and moving it around, and also for the first time crafting your own menu? How did you approach that sort of strategically?
So for the pop-up experience, it wasn't just like a pop-up, it was like a 10-city tour. They took like 10 chefs, put them in different cities, kind of like a shotgun start at a golf tournament.
Okay.
And at the end of the dinner, the guests would get a feedback card, and they would rate you from 1 to 10 on taste, on temperature, what would they actually pay for this if they had to pay for it again, et cetera, et cetera. And they took those cumulative scores and crowned a winner of this tour, and the winner got their own restaurant. So for me, it was more than just a pop-up. It was like, okay, this is my way out. Once again, this is my selling candy on the subway. So I wanted to connect with the diners. So I told my personal story, but I also weaved in whatever location I was in, like cuisine as well. So if I was in Austin, I did an homage to Salt Lick Barbecue. You know, if I was in Chicago, I did, you know, something unique to that region. So that's how I changed it up. But it was incredibly difficult, you know, being in a new city every 4 days, dealing with a new team.
With a new menu.
A new menu, new team, new location, new challenges. It was quite the experience.
This was clearly somewhat of a competition. Do you consider yourself a competitive person?
When I need to be, yeah, for sure.
Which, of course, leads to you then being in another competitive environment in Top Chef. How did that opportunity fall into your lap?
Well, actually, it came from doing the pop-ups. So I got a lot of national press, and I guess that's what the Top Chef casting people look for. And they reached out to me. I did a Zoom, or at that time Skype, I guess, a Skype call, and a couple months later, I was in California.
Off the success of the pop-up tour, you also end up soliciting the interest of some partners, which ends up yielding you your first restaurant, Shabu. Tell me a little bit about what you learned in that process, both about sourcing your business partners, but also about doing the build and putting together your first real concept.
It was incredible. It was incredible. I still think it's the best restaurant I've opened up to this day. We put so much work into it, physical, mental work into that restaurant. Like, that was something that we gave our all. I gave my all for sure at that time. It was a crash course in opening a restaurant, from conception to build out to execution. We know how the story ends, but I don't really have any regrets about it. You know, like I can't dwell on that, but also I can't tell what people are gonna do when situations get tough. I can only react my own way, you know, and get back up when things don't work out. And it taught me a lot about myself in that regard.
Now, with Shabu, things start very auspiciously and fairly quickly start to go off the rails. And there's problems with the construction. The menu becomes prohibitively expensive, which then sparks food industry controversy. And within some number of months after opening, everything is kaput. I'm curious, what was that roller coaster like emotionally for you? And at that moment when you realized that it is over, how did you sort of figure out a path forward for yourself?
Yeah, it was really tough. It was really tough. It was tough being in it. Also, like, the press. You know, I was like a poster child for what not to do in the culinary industry. They were doing like classes on me in school as well at the CIA. It was everywhere I turned, I was reminded of it. But I had to remind myself that, like, people that actually care about you aren't gonna kick you while you're down. So, like, those aren't the people that you should be listening to. You should be listening to the other people that are trying to lift you up, or the people that tell you these things before shit goes left. And I had to dig deep and push through and pick myself up. Luckily, I had people I surrounded myself with that believed in me more than I believed in myself at times. And, you know, I was able to open a restaurant a couple months later.
Immediately after the demise of his first restaurant, Onwuachi retreated from the public eye and reestablished his love for cooking behind the scenes. When he returned to the business in a leading role, his vision for a cuisine incorporating all of his influences would reach new heights and bring him back to his hometown with renewed acclaim. How discreet did the public persona of Kwame become from the person you are sort of underneath all of that. And again, how did that feel when the public you is first exalted and celebrated and then, derided in that way?
I think at that point there was a beautiful present, a beautiful gift that was given to me, which was the removal of the fear of failure or trying to assimilate or, pretend or put on a front. At that point, I was like, fuck it. Like, y'all have done your worst, so I'm just gonna be myself and you can kiss my ass if you don't like it or not. So I opened up an Ethiopian fast casual restaurant called Gorsha. I had a friend pretty much act like the chef. I didn't want to be in the public eye. I just wanted to cook, just to get back to like what I loved doing. And it became like the number 5, the 5th best restaurant in Washington, D.C. at the time, but nobody knew that I was actually the chef in the kitchen. And then a couple months later, I got Kith and Kin, and ended up working with Kith and Kin, being like very, very highly acclaimed restaurant, just me being unapologetically myself. But I think up until then, I didn't really know. I was still young. I was like 23, so I was like in the public eye. There maybe 4 years before that, I was selling candy on the subway. So I go from selling candy on the subway to like 3-4 years later on national television. I don't know. And I'm also still figuring myself out as a young adult. So I think it was very difficult, but I'm very grateful for that experience because it removed that fear of failure from me.
Failure is kind of an opinion, If Beyonce sold 50,000 records, that'd be a failure to her. But if somebody else did that was just up and coming, it'd be the best day of their life, right? So I think it's really an opinion of like how you view yourself and also how others view you. But for me, my quote unquote failures were just big lessons to me, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them.
What is your process when you are coming up with a restaurant? It's a menu, it's a vibe, it's a space, Where do you start and how do you build it out in your head?
It starts with the location for me. Yeah. The location kind of speaks to me because then I can dive in like what was there on the land before, and like really get inspiration from like just that physical structure. And then honestly, there's no blueprint to it just yet. I'm still a young Black chef, I guess, but there's no blueprint yet. So it can start off as something and then morph into something along the way. But for me, it starts with the location, and then it may be the concept, and then the name, and then I can toy around with different things. But there's a lot of factors that go into it, whether it's the vibe, the music, the food, the decor, the location, the identity of the restaurant in and of itself.
How important is the role of storytelling and of theater in creating a restaurant?
I think storytelling for me is key. Like I have a mantra: if a dish tells a story, then it has a soul. You're not just cooking for perfect seasoning. You're cooking to share something with someone, make someone feel something. And that has now bled into everything that I do. The name, the logo, how it's designed, what is the font, the menus, how they're designed. Like everything should tell a story. Theater, I think in the aspect of theater, restaurants are theater. No, not many people are going to restaurants because they're starving. It's not a soup kitchen. They're going to feel something. They're going to meet. They're going to, have fun with friends. They're going there because they're mourning. They're going there because they graduated. And our job is to make people feel comfortable, have great service, and a great meal. And that's part of our stage.
You decided to leave Kith and Kin to try something that was a little bit more, your own. Was that decision difficult given the success that you had enjoyed after having a
Like
little
to do
stumbling?
Tatiana?
Yeah.
So from Kith and Kin, I moved to LA.
Okay.
And I got into acting and creating content for brands.
Okay.
Went back on Top Chef as a judge, wrote another book. I wanted to get away from the restaurant industry because of COVID. I didn't get into it to do takeout food. I got into it to create experiences for people. So I was like, when it comes back around, maybe I'll jump back in. So when things died down and restaurants started to open up and the world started to open back up, that's when Lincoln Center reached out. So I just felt it was time, and there was no better place than to come home to New York.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I mean, it's obviously a very hallowed space. What is the process by which one gets that kind of real estate footprint in Manhattan?
I think you get called up. You don't call them, they call you.
So you basically you were on the phone with a Rockefeller, and they were just like,
Yeah, I was on the phone with Lincoln. No, they called. They were renovating it for the first time since it opened because of COVID. They were able to redo the theater, the lobby, everything, and then they were able to put a restaurant in there. So I got a phone call from someone who represented them. They wanted to bring a chef in to create a concept and put a restaurant there. They were talking with a bunch of different chefs. I gave them my concept, and I think I got a call maybe the same day or a couple days later that they wanted to go with mine.
and I understand the concept was predicated quite specifically on the location and what had been there prior to it becoming Lincoln Center.
Absolutely, yeah. I knew I wanted to do Afro-Caribbean. That's kind of my style. I think I'm still figuring it out, but my style is my culture. So I'm Nigerian, I'm Jamaican, I'm Creole, Trinidadian. So I use those flavors within my cooking. So I told them that, and then I also looked at the land. I was like, okay, what was here before the meeting? I'm like, what was here before Lincoln Center? And I saw that it was Old San Juan Hill, which was an Afro-Caribbean Hispanic community that was pushed out. So Lincoln Center could be built. I think it was by Robert Moses for the de-urbanization of the city at the time. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be dope to put that food back where it probably was? And then, I started toying with names, and then I thought about, oh, well, my upbringing is also Afro-Caribbean Hispanic. I grew up in the Bronx. Oh, what if I named it after something that would remind me of that? Tatiana, growing up in the Bronx. So that's what I mean about everything should tell a story, so it has a soul. So people ask me about the name, it's boom, okay, the cuisine, gotcha. The location, gotcha. You have an explanation for everything. And it helps your staff get behind it too, because then it means something. It doesn't just seem for profit, we're trying to say something here. Everything really tells a story. We talked about that back at the studio, and if it tells a story, it has a soul. So I thought it was important even with design to tell a story. I worked with Modelis Novus, which is an amazing, brilliant architectural firm by Preeti, and we designed it together. So for example, the sculptured clouds, my head's always in the clouds, I'm a dreamer. So I wanted to make sure that was kind of the focal point of the restaurant. But then there's small details like these gold chains. This actually is reminiscent of chain link fences I used to hop as a kid. Now we have them in gold, dripped in gold. The iridescent columns are from the oil slick when you put the fire hydrant on and then you turn it off, and there's this oil sheen on top of the asphalt. So that's there. And then there's other textures from the city of New York, or colors, the oxidization of copper on the Statue of Liberty. You'll see those green hues throughout. So it's very, very New York without it being just in your face. We wanted it to be integrated into the design in a subtle way that still speaks volumes.
I noticed the kitchen here sort of semi-open to the room. What's the significance of that?
I wanted people to be able to see into the action, and also for the cooks to not feel like they're in a dungeon.
Okay.
Every kitchen that I've been in, there were no windows or anything. It's very bright in that kitchen. So you're able to see the plaza, and you're able to see and feel the energy of the dining room, and you can hear the music too. So you'll see the cooks dancing. you'll see the cook's a part of that vibe.
Yeah. And I see during the summer you have an outdoor space now?
Yeah, we have the patio. The patio, I think it's cool because it still has the ambiance of the restaurant, like the music and the food, but it's outside. So you're in Lincoln Center, so it feels very, very much New York with one of the most stunning backdrops New York has to offer.
When you close your eyes and you think about one of your customers at Tatiana exiting the building with a belly full of some of the most delicious food that they've ever had, what are the set of feelings that you are hoping that they are experiencing?
That's an interesting question, a really good question. There's two answers, you know. I think for people that are represented by the culture and the food, I'm so happy that they have a place that they can experience their culture while celebrating a special experience, you know, whether I'll be a birthday or an anniversary, you know, or meeting someone for the first time. You know, there's anyone in this room could go to an Italian restaurant, you know, and propose, or a French restaurant for a meeting, but there's not many places that we can go to experience that while still experiencing our food. So that's what makes me like really, really happy about Tatiana. And then on the other side, for someone who it's not their culture, they're in a place where they can receive it, you know, and they're all eating the same food at the same time. I think Tatiana is one of the most diverse dining rooms in New York City. And you'll see somebody in a do-rag sitting next to somebody in a tuxedo going to the opera, and they're both eating oxtails. And sometimes they're sharing food. And, you know, that cultural equilibrium is what makes me really, really proud of what we do at Tatiana.
Success looks different to many people. I mean, I think success is happiness. As long as you're happy doing what you're doing, you know, you can't really put monetary value on that. I think that's really, really, really the secret of life, is just being happy. There's things that money really can't get you. In the famous words of Kanye West, having money isn't everything, but not having it is.
I understand you have a new restaurant that is opening fairly soon in DC. I'm curious, you know, what is the concept for this restaurant, and where are you in the process of formulating, you know, all the various facets?
Yeah, so this restaurant is really, really cool. It's in the Salamander Hotel, but it's also telling a story, once again. You know, I looked at the structure and where it is, and it's on LaFont Plaza. And then I did some, LaFont was hired by George Washington to create pretty much the streets of Washington, D.C.
Oh, the grid, right?
Yeah, the grid, and you know, in the vein of like European cities. And they needed someone to do the borders, and they hired Benjamin Banneker. And he used the stars to map out, you know, this perfect square or diamond, however you look at it, for the borders of Washington, D.C. So I was like, holy shit, this guy must have been really good at his job to be a black man hired, you know, in the George Washington era to create the borders of Washington, D.C. Like, where did he learn this from? And if I did some more research and finds out he's a descendant of the Dogon tribe in West Africa. So, you know, before colonization, there weren't country lines. It was just very tribal. And there were tribes that were good at battle, and tribes that were good at mining, and tribes that were good at astrology and science. And that was the Dogon tribe. And they used to map things using the stars. So he learned that, you know, it was in his blood. And that's how he was able to do that. So it's very interesting that without West African science, you know, there wouldn't be the capital as we know it today without that influence. So I want to tell the story of DC through a West African lens. So all the different cultures that make DC beautiful and what it is, you know, told through an Afro-Caribbean lens.
Some unconventional ways that I connect through my community is through philanthropy. Every business that I open has a philanthropic arm that we don't really even talk about. You know, Tatiana has a Tatiana gives back program that helps to the beautification of the projects behind Lincoln Center, as well as like feeding the community. My water that's coming out, each can goes back to building a well in West Africa. My family reunion event in Virginia, we have a scholarship fund that sends kids on a full ride to the Culinary Institute of America.
At whatever, 25, 26 years old, you wrote a memoir, which is fairly young for something like that. What do you think the significance of being able to do that has been on everything that has followed?
Well, I think if you don't write your own story, somebody's gonna write it for you, you know, so it's better to be in control of that. And also, when you're present in that thought of crafting a story, then you start to have something to say because you've thought about it. You think about how you're being represented, or even how you're being presented in different rooms. So I think it's really important to craft your own story so that you have a message and you do something while you're here. You know, we only get one of these. And whether you write a memoir at 25 or you write it at 55 or 95, I think everybody has something to say.
You talked a lot about empathy, and I've seen interviews with you talking about sort of mental health and trying to find balance. The discipline of being a chef, however, is an incredibly brutal one. How do you manage to sort of keep your own sanity and also be mindful of, your own sort of state of being?
I read a really good quote once. I was on a mushroom trip walking through Vancouver, and they have a lot of graffiti in the back alleys. And it said, everything's important, but nothing matters. So it's like, I try not to take myself so seriously. Yes, I'm gonna put in the work. I'm gonna build this restaurant. I'm gonna make sure every minute detail is distinct and everything's on point. But at the end of the day, we're just cooking dinner. And I think having that woo-saw makes it all manageable.